Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Fire Up Florida. Yes, I am fired up, and why shouldn't I be? I have Rod Peterson alongside of me, and Rod, obviously, and his wife Serena are the co-hosts of the Cats and Bolts podcast. But Rod is kind enough to give us our time on Monday, and we're going to talk Florida sports. In addition, the fact that we're going to eventually bring this into a national show. With that said, obviously, one of Rod's biggest fans is Josh Adore. What's going on, Rob? It's Rod, by the way. I think.
Say spell check got him. Spell
Spell
check.
check.
Hey,
Yeah, that's
Josh,
okay.
that didn't take long, man. Joshua was on the bit. He's in.
Yeah, he's waiting. This guy. I'm gonna tell you one thing. He texted me during the day. When is hockey coming out? He's trying to come up with new names for the show. We don't need new names. We're gonna stick with the theme under Fire Up Florida because that's where everything originates, and then we'll obviously incorporate a national
Okay.
theme. So,
I'm sorry, Scott. Joshua sounds like my kind of guy. Where's he at, by the way, in South Florida? Where's he at?
in Lake Worth, Florida.
Oh, just a little north of me. I feel like we got to organize a fire up party and get everybody together sometime.
Yeah, I'll tell you what. I'm sure this guy will definitely go for it. That's for sure. So, Joshua, stay tuned, man. You might have to. Your face will eventually have to pop out in person or behind the scenes to talk to our buddy Rod. So, all right. Well, let's get to it. The show is actually titled Stanley Cup Playoffs by the Numbers, and we're going to lead off with this. Panthers became the ninth team in NHL history to win the Stanley Cup after losing the previous final, the third club to do so in the league's expansion era since 1967-68. Some thoughts there,
You know,
Rod.
I think on the last show we discussed this a little bit, and I'm glad that you brought that stat up because I'm like, I'd heard the Panthers were only the third to do it, but I thought it was in 100+ years of Stanley Cup competition.
Right,
I didn't realize it was just in the expansion era,
right.
and yeah, it's history making. And I want to just say, I'm like Joshua. I appreciate the opportunity to talk hockey in the summer. Period. I don't care if it's Florida, Canada, the North Pole. It's nice to talk about it, but it's just listen. Last week I was on a podcast called Cats and Rats, Scott, and I
Okay.
said I don't think the Panthers fans. I don't think it's hit them that they've won the Stanley Cup yet.
Yeah.
And the reaction that I got was immense from Panthers fans. From Sue, I agree. I won't get it until I'm sitting in my seat and I see that banner going up in October. To others saying, "Oh no, it's hit me. I partied every single day since they won the Stanley Cup." And I'm like, "No, what it really means, Scott. Like one of the biggest things is you've gone from that really ugly pool of teams that have never won a Stanley Cup,
Right.
Columbus, Vancouver, San Jose, Winnipeg. It's gross. To the champions, to the winners, to the adults table. That's like the biggest thing that I don't think fans have really realized yet.
Well, I think the one thing that should really be understood here, too, though, is Buffalo and Vancouver are the oldest teams left to have not won a Stanley Cup. So let's keep that right. So Josh is asking me, will I be on there on 10-8? You know what, Josh? I don't know where I'll be on 10-8. I mean, but if we could do something in person, we're certainly going to do everything. Let me just figure about getting through this next week out in Milwaukee, and I'll bring up 10-8 when I'll bring up 10-8. But you could ask Josh. I mean, but yeah, if we can't get this guy in the air, we could get him in person. He's a much different cat there in person, that's for sure. But yeah, when you talk about, I mean, it is good to be able to go out there and look at the Panthers. They're not on an infamous list. That anytime you get off of an infamous list, that's what you need to do. And this year they have. I mean, obviously you have the different players going to different places to have their day with the cup. Hey, that's okay. You might as well. Now he knows you had to get 16 wins to get it. So you might as well celebrate it because it won't be long that September rolls around. That okay, I'm glad you had your time, okay, with the cup, and now it's time to repeat. And as everybody knows, okay, that's not an easy situation to do it. But you know what? Let's not worry about the Panthers repeat. They should enjoy their moment as champions for the time being.
It's not a criticism that it hasn't hit them yet, by the way. I think you understand that, and it's scaring me
Right,
how much we're on the same page. It's
right,
scaring me, Scott, because I wear a wristband that says one day at a time. And if you know anything
Right.
about recovery, you know what that means. I'm like
Oh
10
yeah.
8, real 10 what? No, I'm not thinking about it either. We're trying to get through this show in the next week. But just the history that the Panthers have made, that's a topic for future shows. Will they repeat? But the season before, when they went to the Stanley Cup final and lost, here's a stat I loved. They were out of a playoff spot for 72% of the season. For
Right.
72% of the time, they weren't even in a playoff spot. They're the
Right.
first team to do what they did to make the playoffs and go all the way to the Stanley Cup and lose. This is just a very special group. And to be honest, I think the core of it is together coming back. I don't know if they're going to win another Stanley Cup and repeat, but they'll be in the playoffs. It would be a massive fail if they weren't.
Well, George Richards of the Miami Herald and I talked about it. Because I see him from time to time at Marlins games, and George and I have a good
Yeah.
working relationship. He told me that this team record-wise isn't good as the year before, but then again, you have, your first-year hockey coach in Paul Maurice, so it was just a matter of getting used to the coach is really what you're doing and getting used to a
Yeah.
new system. But obviously, like George and I talked, as long as you get in the tournament, anything goes at that particular point. So, what we're going to do right now is go to a station break, Candy, and then we'll proceed with the show.
You are listening to the South Florida Tribune's publishing company, which published a book last November. It was called Lessons from the Microphone, Tuning into the Enduring Wisdom of Visionary Leaders. It is written by none other than Scott Motor City Mad Mouth Morganroth. It is available on Amazon, Google, Kindle, Barnes & Noble, Apple. Get your copy today. It talks about how the media business has changed over the 40 plus years Scott has been in the business. All kinds of interesting stories. You just never know what you might learn. Get your copy today. You can go to our website, www.southfloridatribune.com, where you can buy merchandise and get South Florida Tribune merchandise. Maybe you need a baseball cap, or for these hot days, you want like a tank top and shorts, or for when the weather gets cooler, you want a sweatshirt or sweatpants, you name it. Go to our website, go to the store, buy some merchandise for you to flash it all over the United States. Plus, you can watch Scott's other broadcasts. You can see all of our different material that we get. We get quotes from the Jaguars, the Dolphins, the Lions. We also get college things from the Hurricanes, the Gators, the USF Bulls, and FAU Owls. I know the Olympics will be starting, and I know there's some articles about some of the college athletes that went to the Gators that will be competing. So go to our website and check it out. If you like to listen to podcasts, you can find us wherever you get your podcasts: Google, Apple, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Castbox, Deezer. If you've missed anything that I've talked about, it's scrolling along the bottom. Back to you, Scott.
Thank you, Candy. Also on Twitter X, you can reach us at Tribune South. All right, we'll continue on. Conn Smythe Trophy winner Connor McDavid notched 42 points, the fourth highest on on record behind Wayne Gretzky, who did it two times, and Mario Lemieux. Get this, McDavid's 34 assists, broke the record Gretzky had for 36 years when he was that to get 36 years, 31 in 1988. Let's talk about Connor McDavid. To me, this guy, I hope, does win a Stanley Cup at some point, but it wasn't meant to be this year. And I'll tell you, he had the Panthers on their heels throughout the whole series, especially when he got going, Rod.
Oh, I remember going into the series. Aaron Ekblad was asked, "How do you stop him?" And he
Right.
said, "You don't." And I don't know. I think they were talking about Herschel Walker back in the day when they said, you can't stop him. You can only hope to contain him. And that's a little bit the same as Connor McDavid. And they did. That game 7, it all came down to one game, Scott, and he was held pointless. And I believe Leon Draisaitl too, his riding shotgun. I hope he wins the Stanley Cup too. I didn't want it to
Right.
happen in 2024, but it's real interesting when you open this thing about how the Panthers were the third team to win a Stanley Cup after losing the year before in the expansion era. There was only 21 teams in Gretzky's time, and for a lot of
Right.
Lemieux's time too. I think we got to start to think about the fact that there's a very good chance Connor McDavid does not win a Stanley Cup in his career. Crosby's got one. Crosby's got one. Gretzky's got 4. Lemieux has 2. It would be real incomplete if Connor McDavid does not win a Stanley Cup, but I would say there's a very good chance he doesn't.
Well, you got more teams. We got 32 teams, so it's making it more and more difficult, especially if parity continues.
That's what I'm saying.
Right. So getting in the playoffs is a task in its own, is really what it is. And when you get in there, you better be hot. And we've seen hot teams be hot team. I don't care what sport, Rod, you're talking about. It doesn't matter. Okay. A hot team in the playoffs, especially in the NHL, when you have a hot goaltender, they'll lead you all the way to where you need to go. And that's hot. That's what makes hockey so interesting. So, yeah, I mean, I'm just looking at these numbers. They are staggering. When we talk about Gretzky 36 years ago and 31, and you talk about that many points, it's just unbelievable when you put Connor McDavid in the same sentence as Wayne Gretzky. So as we continue on the 2024 Stanley Cup playoffs, 45% of its games feature a comeback win, the third highest rate through the past 30 years, behind 1999. You had 51%, 2006, 47%. And then 2010, 47%. Well, you know what? Obviously, what we're seeing here is the old thing from Yogi Berra. It's not over till it's over. And that was definitely indicative of what we saw the Panthers do this year.
That's really interesting. You would bring that up. Whatever the starting point was, 1999, that's when my dad won a Stanley Cup with the Dallas Stars. I didn't tell you that. He was a scout with the Dallas for 26 years.
Really?
So that's where I get a lot of my hockey information and knowledge and background from. But listen, I really loved when Ovechkin came out, was it this year or the year before, and said he and Sidney Crosby saved the NHL in 2008 when they came into the league. And I was like, or maybe it was 2006, whatever year it was. I'm like, initially I was like, wait a minute. They kind of did. And I think they're coming out of a $6.2 billion revenue season. You must have seen that story just before the Stanley Cup playoffs. The NHL's never made more money. They're on the heels of MLB, and they're in the conversation of NBA. Nobody's in the conversation of the NFL. But whatever they've done for the NHL, and we don't have time to get into it tonight, but I would say it's never been better. Those comebacks you just said, the skill of the athletes, I've never seen a better NHL than it is right now.
Well, 6.2 billion is good for the NHL. You got to remember, I don't think their salary cap is much more than 88 to 90 million per year.
It's going up.
It's in that right. Well, it's going up, but that's at the range as I saw it the last time. And they have adequate TV partners. Certainly, ABC picks up the network games, which is good. And of course, TNT and my friend Kenny Alper do a great job over there. And of course, they have some pretty good announcers on ESPN. But I do know that when they brought ESPN back, they needed ESPN for exposure in the worst way, is what they did. And that's what they were able to. And TNT is, don't sell them short. In fact, here's a little FYI. They did match the bid, by the way, of Amazon for the NBA package. I don't know if you knew this earlier, but it was announced today that they did. Now it'll be the NBA if they want to decide if they want Amazon or they want to keep TNT. We'll get into that. But it just goes to show you that sports is a hot ticket is really what it is. And we're finding that out with these streaming rights for sure.
I don't think it's a coincidence that the NHL goes back to ESPN and they produce their highest revenue year ever 1 year later, right? It's not a coincidence. It's the exposure thing, and they found a way to make money. The buildings are full. You said you wanted to get into Arizona tonight. Are we going to?
No. Well, we're going to save that for the next show when we start going into more national stuff. Our plan here is I want to give this show one more shot with the Panthers, because the numbers that I've been watching and observing were definitely worth bringing out tonight. As we start to approach the month of August, I think that's when we start looking at the NHL more from a big picture standpoint. So
you're the
question.
Boss.
No, I'm just saying. I'm giving the Panthers their kudos one more time before we go in a different direction.
Which they deserve.
Yeah, but no, I mean, listen, 30 years in the league, they're able to finally notch their first championship ring. More power to them. All right, well, if you thought the numbers I gave you were interesting, let me give you a few more. A total of 16.3 million viewers watched Game 7 of the 2024 Stanley Cup Final across North America. And I emphasize North America. It was the second most watched NHL game across North America on record since 2004. How does that one strike you?
A lot. I'd be interested to see if they had the breakdown there. I think it was, they said North America because they wanted to loop in the Canadian viewers. And I think it was
Right.
9 million in America, 7 million in Canada, roughly. Great numbers. As a matter of fact, I was talking to Bill Lindsay about this. That Game 7 was the second most watched Stanley Cup playoff game ever, period. No matter the network, whatever. And I was like, what was the number one? You wouldn't in a million years guess, and I don't remember why it was. It was 2013 Bruins Blackhawks.
Well, you know, that's an original six matchup, too.
That's got to be the only reason.
Well, that is, yeah. I mean, come on. Bruins and the Blackhawks. Give me a break. Well, think about it for a second. Okay, Rod. If we're talking original six, don't you think in a million years that they'd get the matchup? In fact, you know, if I had anything to say about the league, and I won't, I would rather have all teams in the original six in one division, and then you tack on two. But that's just my opinion, being an old school hockey guy. Original six, people. That, to me, when you have a lot of them, I think 5 of the 6 are in the actual Eastern Conference, with Chicago being the lone one in the West.
And yeah, for sure. But it's funny you say that. I could go along with that. I could. But you know, your viewers are going to know, and the Panthers fans watching, that I'm Canadian by heart, becoming an American with a green card. But during the bubble, okay, they played in the bubble, as you remember, 2020, right? Stanley Cup playoffs. And then the next year they divided up the divisions, and they had that Canadian division, all Canadian. That was the greatest thing I'd ever seen in my life. All 7 Canadian teams, because crossing the border was an issue. So the problem there was the time zones. But I'll never forget, like, Vancouver to Montreal is big time zone. Tough to be in the same division, right? But Eric DeHakchik is a Hall of Fame writer with The Athletic. And he says, we can't have this Canadian division. It's like having birthday cake every night for supper, right? You got to save some special matchups, because in Canada, all Canadian, Toronto versus Montreal, Vancouver versus Ottawa, it's special. I love that alignment. All Canadian division. So they're not going to do all original 6. They're not going to do all Canadian, but we can dream. We all have our desires, right?
Well, think about it, though. Once upon a time, the Detroit Red Wings were in the Western Conference, and they were begging to play teams like Chicago, St. Louis, and they ended up putting Columbus in there because they needed one East Coast team. So I don't know. I don't think an original 6 division, to me, is as far-fetched as one would think, because they're all, you know, in a specific area. If you start doing what you talked about, though, moments ago, though, Rod, where you're talking about Toronto to Vancouver, Montreal to Canada, you know what? You better have a private plane for that, because the Red Wings had a private plane to do all that. Because if you try to fly commercial, that's another story. But I see your point. But an all original 6th division, and you're right, it won't. But at least there are 5 of the 6 still in the Eastern Conference. We just need to get Chicago over, but then that takes away from St. Louis. But so be it.
Well, it's a great proposition and idea. I wonder, why would you think they haven't done that yet? They must have thought about it.
Well, you know what? We'll just see where the expansion ducks line up if they decide to go ahead and do it. And I'll tell you why I bring that point up, Rod. And we're going to go back to the NBA about this. Let's just say hypothetically, okay, that they do what they are planning to do. You get Las Vegas and you get Seattle back in. You'd wonder what team in the Western Conference would be likely to move east. You know, conventional wisdom to me would say you leave the Pelicans alone. And who's the other team that's west? I'm trying to think. And New Orleans, and there's one other team. It'll come back to me by the end of the show, hopefully. But then you move the Minnesota Timberwolves over to the east, and then you pair them with Milwaukee and the rest of those teams. I'm trying to think of the Pelicans, and I don't know. There's another team.
Oklahoma City?
Yeah, you know what? I think that might be the one, right? I think you're right. Thank you. So I don't have to go crazy wondering what it was. I think you're right. It could be Oklahoma City. Leave them west. and then you bring Minnesota into that conference. So I don't think it's as far fetched as most people would think, but it all depends on expansion and geographical sensibility is really what it comes down to.
Yeah, it's hey, people love talking about it. I can't. Yeah, people love talking about it, but
Yeah,
it
but
doesn't
that
really matter what we think. But
but then you wonder why, as time goes on, we're going to have local content from both the Lightning and the Panthers. That's why this show is ultimately pivoting towards a national show so we can cover these topics and give them the same attention. Yeah, for hockey, their numbers this year were better than in the past, and Gary Bettman's done a good job, but there's still a long ways to go from anybody taking them seriously with those numbers compared to the other three sports.
like I said though, they're getting close. I'd have to look it up again. They were close to either NBA or MLB, and I got to think NBA is ahead of MLB for revenue, but it might not be. You know, um, but I will tell you this. This is why I said I don't think Panthers fans realize the gravity of winning the Stanley Cup yet, and I don't think people realize the gravity of the NHL posting a record $6.2 billion revenue. Here's why I think it's such a big deal, Scott. And I love the business of sport. Obviously, you do too. But Gary Bettman can point to that and say, "This is why we do what we do." He can point
Right,
to that number and say, "We know what we're doing."
right,
All the time, right? And I think that they do. Serena hates a strong word. My wife strongly dislikes Gary Bettman, but I don't have an issue for him. She hates that. She hates that he's grown hockey in America. She's a Canadian girl. I said, hey, we wouldn't be living in Florida with NHL teams to cover if we didn't have expansion. But she thinks Bettman's anti-Canadian. I don't. Topic for you can ask her about it when you get her on.
Well, you know what I want you to do. Text me with that topic, and we're gonna after we get off today or tomorrow. I want to do a little bit more deep thought into that. But because I've got some ideas about Quebec City and the Winnipeg markets. But we'll do that another time. But please text that to me. All right, as we continue to move along here on Fire Up Florida, we're talking the Florida Panthers and the 46 road wins in the 2024 Stanley Cup playoffs were one shy of the NHL record for most in a single postseason set in 2012 and matched in 2023. Road Warriors, my friend. Okay, just because you get home ice advantage doesn't mean you're going to go out there and win a series at all, does it?
Well, you wouldn't think. And that's why I think the game 7 of the Stanley Cup final was a toss up. I don't think the home ice meant a whole lot. The final score was 2-1 in the end, right? It certainly wasn't a blowout. But I heard
Right.
an interview. My home gym is Johnny O's. Shout out Johnny Olson, Johnny O's Gymnasium on Boca Raton Boulevard. Every morning I go in there and run and listen to NHL radio. And one morning, Bill Zito was on there, and he was asked, the general manager of the Panthers, about the success the Panthers were having on the road last season. And they said, what would you point your finger to for that? And he goes, I'm glad you asked. And I don't know the inner workings of the Panthers, but they've got sports psychologists, sports scientists, physicists, the whole thing. And he said the amount of time we spend on recovery for our bodies, travel, when we leave, when we return, do we go the night before, do we go the morning of, all that stuff. He goes, we've spent thousands of hours studying this. And it sounds to me like more than any other NHL team Scott ever has. And that's why I think when you lift the Stanley Cup and realize all that work was actually worth it, it kind of tells you a little bit of what a savant Bill Zito is. It sure as hell wasn't luck.
No, I don't think it was luck by any stretch. You got to remember one thing. I think that when teams play on the road, they're probably a lot more loose than they are at home because all they have to do is think about the game and not everything that's outside of it, such as the fans. Don't get me wrong,
Uh,
there's nothing wrong with the fans.
uh, yeah. I'm
Okay.
sorry to cut you off. Continue.
No, that's all right. Go ahead and cut me off. You had something meaningful to say. Go ahead. I want to
Well,
hear it now.
just game 4 Stanley Cup final. This was a hotly debated topic in Canada because I was in Canada when the Stanley Cup final was going on. Game 4 in Edmonton, Panthers were on a verge of a sweep. And all the coverage was that all the families were flying into Edmonton. All the staff that wasn't already in Edmonton from the Panthers was going to Edmonton. It was so presumptuous that they were going to win. And I was like, I don't like the sound of this. I don't like the
Right.
sound of this. And they ended up getting pumped 8-1. So you
Yeah.
talk about the pressure at home. They put
Yeah.
pressure on themselves in game 4. and got pumped. And then they came back, and then so they had to end up going back for Game 6, which was an elimination game. They could have won the Stanley Cup on the road in Game 6. And I would have to check with the Panthers people. I haven't talked to them since, but apparently they told everybody, stay home. If you're not part of our regular traveling party, we don't need you in Edmonton.
Right.
And so it works against them. Like, this is incredibly finicky stuff. You
Right.
talked about, Candy said you've been in sports 40 plus years.
Right.
This is really important stuff that teams
Yeah.
spend so much time agonizing on that I don't think the fans understand or realize.
Yeah, nothing against fans per se, but when you're in the media like we are, okay, and I've been inside war rooms when it comes to the NFL and things like that, I try to shelter out some of the fans talk because I've seen a lot of things from a different perspective. And I knew, to me, home ice advantage in the NHL doesn't carry as much weight as it does other places like the NFL, MLB, the NBA. And I'll stand on my merits with that. I don't care what anybody says. So, right, we got one other topic, and then I want to talk about an anniversary that
Okay.
obviously took place. Our final topic of the night, then we're going to get to the anniversary portion of the program, is the 2024 playoffs lived up to the hype. And had an average, get this, of 3.4 million viewers per game in North America. These were the most watched playoffs across North America since 2017. Folks, I have stacked this show up so much with all kinds of facts, you're going to have to watch it again, okay? Because when you watch it again, you'll realize the magnitude of what the playoffs are about, as well as what Florida had to deal with. So there you go, per game. Take it away.
It's kind of amazing to me, and I'll tell you why. Leading into the playoffs, we were all frothing at the mouth because it was the greatest ending of the regular season in NHL history. If you were paying attention, we all thought since December it was going to be the Panthers and the Leafs in round one. And it would
Right,
have been a monumental collapse by Toronto or the Panthers for that not to happen.
right,
And then what happens? Boston loses at home on the Tuesday night to Ottawa. The Panthers beat the Leafs on that same Tuesday night. And all of a sudden, it's Panthers light. It came down to the Thursday night. Within an hour, 3 series changed. It was the greatest ending, Scott, in the history of the NHL regular season. And then we
right.
got into the playoffs. And to be honest, round one was not all that. It wasn't. Florida beat Tampa in a 5-game series. We were hoping it would
Right,
go 7. That wasn't much of a series at all.
right,
So the round one wasn't great. I'd love to talk to the people that watch these Stanley Cup playoffs because you and I are, well, me for sure, we're going to be watching anyways. I've
right.
often wondered what makes the average guy or gal watch that isn't normally. Round one didn't live up to the hype, but then it got really good rounds 2, 3, 4. And let's also not forget, you want to throw in what did you say, 16 million people North America wide watched Game 7.
Right.
Everybody was saying this is the worst Stanley Cup final in the history of the NHL because the Panthers were up 3-0. They're like, what a brutal story. All
Right.
of a sudden, hairpin turn. Oilers win 3 in a row, and we're going to Game 7. It's all of a sudden one of the best storylines in NHL history. That didn't hurt either. People love a story. You know that. You've been in this business longer than me.
Well, what you have to understand is the round two, you had Boston against Florida, right? And Boston had walked into that series having beaten Florida in the regular season series. And I tell you
Three.
what, I don't care about regular season. When you're playing in the playoffs, that's when it's one team focusing on one team, not catching them the wrong end of a road trip or any of that. And it just shows you the difference between the regular season and the postseason. They're different animals for sure. So this goes to show you if you're a road warrior, to me, then obviously you're going to do well. And I think that when you talk about 3.4 million viewers per game in North America, I think a lot of times it's good for the game where you're able to stretch out over two countries is really what it does. And I think that that's the thing that just I'm intrigued when you have this being the only major sport where you have that many teams in North America combined. Go ahead.
No, I agree. And that's why I was surprised that 2013 had higher ratings than this year because of the Oilers contingent. Like a lot of Canadians were watching because Edmonton was in it. To be honest, if it had been It was the Oilers beat Vancouver in the Western Final. If it had been two U.S. teams, the ratings wouldn't have been high in Canada. As high in Canada, they wouldn't have been. I think the Oilers being in it was a huge factor. Great story. The greatest player in the game. He's like the LeBron of the NHL, but without the championships. So there was some good stories.
Mm-hmm.
It took a while getting going, though. I think you'd agree.
Yeah, but I'll tell you one thing: if you're the Vancouver Canucks and the Panthers, there, if you think these numbers are good now, I can only imagine they would have been way better with the Vancouver Canucks because we've talked about three cosmopolitan cities, right? You got Montreal, Toronto, Vancouver. I mean, nothing against Winnipeg, okay? Nothing against Montreal, nothing against Calgary, and nothing against Edmonton. But you're talking about big cities that, yeah, we know Montreal is big, but Toronto and Vancouver are the cream of the crop when it comes to cosmopolitan cities. I've been to Toronto and Vancouver, yet to go to Montreal, but I look forward to doing that at one point or another. All right, finally, we're going to get to today is the second anniversary of the Matthew Tkachuk trade. What were your thoughts, Rod, when this trade transpired?
Well, I was in Calgary, Scott, that summer. I spent 2 summers in Calgary, and to be honest with you, I was doing my talk show, the Daily Rod Peterson Show. Cats and Bolts hadn't been born yet, and I was doing it from a casino in Calgary, and I was looking for anywhere to go to get away from the talk in Calgary. It is insane. You talk about the Canadian markets you've been at. Just consider they talk about the NHL every day, all day, 24/7, 365.
Right.
And so the question was, is Matthew Tkachuk going to sign? They like re-signing Calgary. They loved Matthew Tkachuk in Calgary, and a lot of them still do. So when he, if you recall, he informed the Flames, you might as well trade me, because when I'm a free agent in a year, I'm not re-signing. It took the city about a day, 24 hours to get over that kick in the gut. And then they trade him to Florida for Jonathan Huberdeau. I think it's important to remember this. Hubie is a franchise great. A case could be made until
Right.
the last 2 years. He's the greatest Panther ever. It would be up there. He'd be in the conversation with the Luongos and the Van Beesbrooks, and Sasha Barkov
Right.
gets his votes. My point is, in Calgary, they thought the Flames fleeced the Florida Panthers. This was a joke. Jonathan Huberdeau, career leader in games played and assists for the Panthers, and you're going to throw in Mackenzie Weegar too? Maybe our future captain? Oh, they were laughing at the Panthers. They said Brad Treliving, the GM, fleeced Bill Zito. It took a year. Didn't even take a year for them to realize, Panthers
Yeah,
won this one, didn't walk.
but then meanwhile, I remember seeing the story, okay, that wasn't it Kachuk that went back on there and told the Calgary Flames, at least you may like me a little better now because we beat the Edmonton Oilers. And you want to talk about an intense rivalry that goes away. That made him feel much better is really what it did. I mean, think about it. Hey, you know what? I won here in Florida. Good stuff. But we beat the Edmonton Oilers. Don't beat me up too bad. And let me tell you, I'm sure that they were glad he got the ring because who do they hate more? Do they hate Kachuk or do they hate the Edmonton Oilers?
It's Edmonton by far. And when you want to talk about sports rivalries, it'd be a wonderful episode right there. What comes to mind? Red Sox, Yankees, Celtics, Lakers.
Right.
What else? You tell me.
Well, Michigan, Ohio State's one, but yeah, I'm not going to give away all my hay here tonight. I'm going to let you and I talk about it with a few other people.
You wouldn't bite. So the Oilers Flames is up there. You got to understand. I went to college in Calgary, broadcast school. They wake up every morning, Albertans, and think about how much they hate the rival city.
Yeah.
And how they're going to beat and who's the better team. And it hasn't been a discussion the last couple of years. They hate with a passion. And to be honest, I respect it. I enjoy it. Sometimes it gets to be a little much. That's why I love when I go to Florida. People are passionate about their sports, but not quite like that. They're happy for Matthew that he won a Stanley Cup, but the first return, he got booed. He did get booed, but he didn't this year. He didn't this year when he went back. They love him. He's a lovable guy.
Yeah, I agree. But let's face reality. I think the biggest rivalry and one of the biggest, I'd say Montreal, Toronto, and it happened to be on my 20th birthday. And I ended up on my birthday, Rod. Okay, and I actually bought ticket a couple of tickets from a scalper, and I told him it was my birthday. He cut me a little bit of slack, is what he did, and that was unbelievable. My 20th birthday, and I'm now 61, and I'll be 62 at the end of the year, and it was just surreal to be able to see the Canadians and the Leafs at Maple Leaf Gardens. That to me, it just doesn't get much better than that.
Oh,
So.
it doesn't. I didn't get to Maple Leaf Gardens. What? I got outside it. I never got to a game in it. And once I finally got inside, it was a grocery store. They've now changed it back to a hockey rink, thank God. These are historic facilities, man. Which the NHL was built on, as you know. You're a lucky guy.
Well, you know what? I'll tell you one thing. When I went to Maple Leaf Gardens a few months ago, it was neat. I don't care what they did to the inside, whether they made part of it a grocery store, and as well as the fact that there's school playing there. Maple Leaf Gardens, they left the infrastructure alone, and they kept a lot of the landmarks and marks that you could see about what was. So I think they've done an unbelievable job with Maple Leaf Gardens, so that anybody that hasn't seen it many years ago can actually go out there and show how sustainable it is. Now, what I didn't know was how close that Maple Leaf Gardens is to downtown Toronto within about 10, 15 minutes. That part I didn't know. It was unbelievable. It's not like Toronto's a huge city to begin with, but when I was driving that city myself for the first time, then I realized how much closer they were downtown. But they've done, I think, an unbelievable job with Maple Leaf Gardens. And you know what, folks? If you're in the Toronto area, you go to Maple Leaf Gardens and you're going to feel a lot of hockey blood in your system when you go. So, meanwhile, folks who are watching Fire Up Florida, my name is Scott Morgan, Motor City Badmouth. Please be joined by my co-host, Rod Peterson. Rod does Cats and Bolts podcast. And, of course, now he is paired up with me. I don't know whether he should feel good about that or not, because I go out there and talk his ear off every week, but I guess he's complaining. He's on his second show, and we're looking for a whole lot more collaboration between us when it's all said. And I let everybody draw their own crazy conclusions, but we do try to keep it real and interesting, and that's exactly what we try to do here on the network. Coming up afterwards, we have 108 Stitches Baseball Talk. I'll be on with George Eichhorn, Ashton Nix, Eric Katz, and Mark Meriday, who will probably be making his debut on this show in the next 2, 3, 4 weeks or so. Right now, we're just trying to continue to find more and more people to add to this show, because we know what we want it to be, we know what it is, and we know what it's capable of becoming. So with that said, Katie, let's come in for a station break, and then we'll let Ron go ahead and let everybody know how they can get a hold of us.
Tonight's episode of Fire Up is brought to you by the South Florida Tribune Publishing Company, which published a book in November, Lessons from the Microphone, Tuning into the Enduring Wisdom of Visionary Leaders. Scott writes about his 40-plus years in the media business and how it has evolved. Old school meets new school media. Get it? It's available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Kindle, Apple, and Google. If you like to listen to podcasts, you can listen to our broadcast anywhere you get your podcast, whether it be iHeartRadio, Google, Apple, Deezer, CastBox, you name it, we're there. We have a website, www.southfloridatribune.com, where you can read some of Scott's articles. You can see some of the pictures I've taken. You can also get transcripts from the Dolphins, the Jaguars, the Lions. We have Panthers stuff up there. We have local colleges, including the Gators, the Hurricanes, the Owls, and the Bulls. We also have an email address, so if you'd like to email us any show ideas, southfloridatribune@gmail.com. We have on our website, we have a store where you can get a t-shirt, a baseball cap, an umbrella with the South Florida Tribune logo on it, or the Motor City Madmouth logo on it. Go check us out. Again, that website is www.southfloridatribune.com. Right in the middle of the front page, there's a link to our store where I believe there's even a coupon for 20% off. Get your material today. Let me think. Anything else, Scott? Did I miss something?
No, I mean, other than Twitter.
Oh, at Tribune South is where you can find it. One last thing, if you want to sponsor a show or advertise, call Scott, 954-304-5885. 4941. Back to you, Scott.
All right, well done, Candy. With that said, I'm going to turn it over to Rod. Let everybody know how they can get a hold of you.
Hey, it's pretty simple. You see that name on the screen right there if they're watching the video, at Rod Peterson on Twitter. Start there. I'm into a lot of things. The Cats and Bolts podcast. I don't think I told you I'm also a mental health and addiction recovery coach. Peterson Recovery on all Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, the same thing, helping people reclaim their lives. So that's kind of all about me.
Well, great stuff here, Rod. Obviously, we'll do this again in 2 weeks. Candy and I will be back in the Midwest, so we will not do an episode next Monday night, but it won't be it will, we'll be able to be back here better than ever, and I'm looking to have more people involved to go along with what we've already built here over the course of the first 2 weeks. So on behalf of Rod Peterson, my name is Scott Morgan, Rock the Motor City Madmouth. Thank you for joining us here on Fire Up Florida, and we will see you in 2 weeks. And if you want to see our show again, just go back to YouTube, because we gave you a lot of information to bite on tonight. Take care, everybody, and please check out all of our other shows here on the South Florida Tribune YouTube channel. Great job, Rod, but we have a lot more on our agenda for sure. So good night, everybody, and just 108 Stitches Baseball Talk is next. Good night now.